Hey guys, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern. Today you are just getting an audio voiceover. I was having some technical difficulties, so you will still get all the information you need to know even without my hand gestures. Today we are continuing on with our Unit 1 lectures for AP World History Modern. We are continuing to learn about Europe. We just learned about the Byzantines, and now let's talk about medieval Europe specifically. So, for your Bellwork for today, I would like you to please describe the Great Schism. What is that word means? Who's involved? So do a who, what, where, when, why. Who's involved? When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why does it matter? So today is a continuation of topic 1.6 of our AP World History topics, specifically on medieval Europe. So the objectives we will be working with today: explain the causes and consequences of political decentralization in Europe from 1200 to 1450, and please explain the effects of agriculture on social organization in Europe. Okay, so what do we mean when we say medieval? What does this language mean? Well, you might hear about the Middle Ages, you might hear about the Dark Ages. Medieval is the term that is currently popular for historians to use. All three terms are acceptable. The Dark Ages is pretty much rejected by scholars nowadays, but they are used to describe the time period between Greco-Roman antiquity and the Renaissance. So, what do we call this time period between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance? Well, we will be calling it the medieval period. So, what are some of the things we're seeing during this medieval period? Well, we are seeing lots of extremely devout Christians with strong participation. Missionaries are fervently spreading Christianity throughout Europe. We see a change in the relationship between Western Europe and other regions. Europe is originally, at the start of the medieval period, going to be very much at the mercy of invasions, Vikings, barbarians. We see that Europe will begin to participate more and more with trade with Asia and Africa. And we see that contact with the Byzantines and the Arabs through the Crusades will really teach Western scholars advances in mathematics, science, and philosophy. It's interesting because Europeans in general are very nervous about Islam as a religion, a threat to Christianity, a threat to the Holy Land, and yet Europeans will actively copy the Islamic caliphates, legal systems, science, art. It's all going to be very influential. So, in Central Europe, think Germany, you have multiple Germanic tribes, and these variety of Germanic tribes are the ones who had been harrying the Roman Empire for a long time now. So you had the Franks, the Carolingians. So of the groups, the Franks are the strongest. And from the Franks, this group, Visigoths, Goths, right? There's a lot of groups. So from the Franks, you will have Charles Martel, who's a Carolingian, that's his family name, Carolingian Frankish ruler. He will defeat the Muslims at the Battle of Tours. So, if you remember, the Muslims had gone across North Africa, they'd gone into Spain, and they were working their way up towards Europe. Well, potentially, Europe could have all gone Muslim instead of Christian if it wasn't for Charles Martel in the Battle of Tours in 732, where he really defeats the Muslim armies and stops the Muslim advance into Europe. So the Iberian Peninsula will still be Muslim, but we see that this is sort of a turning point. Over the course of the 9th century, so that's the 800s, the Carolingian dynasty grows in power, And from the Carolingian dynasty, you'll see the origins of modern France and Germany. It will fully be established by Charlemagne. So Charlemagne is Charles Martel's grandson, and military effectiveness is key here. So Charlemagne is going to be king of the Franks and then emperor of the Carolingian Empire, which encompassed Gaul and parts of Germany and Italy. You can see it on the map. So here's the big thing about Charlemagne. It's going to be his relationship with the Pope. So Charlemagne creates this empire and he says, I'm Rome, right? I am a continuation of Rome. This is the Holy Roman Empire because we're ordained by God. Well, how do you prove that you're ordained by God? When Charlemagne was being crowned, he didn't have his wife put the crown on his head. He got on his knees in front of the Pope, and the Pope put the crown on his head. So this is a really important symbolic moment because it sets a precedent that the church has to approve of a king for that king to be legitimate. So essentially, this move places the Pope not only at the same level as kings in terms of power, but actually a step above him. If the Pope says, no, this king is not ordained by God, his word is law. This king is illegitimate, not ordained by God. And it's a huge deal. So the Treaty of Verdun is going to result in the division of the Holy Roman Empire among Charlemagne's grandsons because his empire is not really as equipped to govern such a wide area. So it will result into the division to sort of France, Burgundy, and Germany. And these are just based off the languages. So while you have this happening, see Franks, the Cordoba, Emirate of Cordoba, so Muslim caliphate. Here's the Muslims. You got the Bulgarians over here doing their own thing. Anglo-Saxons, lots of different groups. So while the Carolingians are doing their own thing, they are constantly fighting off the Vikings. So the Vikings are going to be Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish in origin. We will see them as a dominant threat throughout the 8th through 11th century, so that's 700s to 1000. It's interesting. Without the Vikings, we don't have European feudalism because the Viking raids will cause feudal states to form. So the Vikings will sail down from Scandinavia. They have these shallow-hulled boats, so that means their boat isn't very deep. So that means these boats can go up the rivers into the interior of Europe. They're not just stuck in the ocean. When they go to the interior and they do their raids, they will take wealth, but they will also take slaves. So people in Europe want protection against the Vikings. They want protection against these raids. I mean, it's pretty impressive. These boats are lightweight. They have wide hulls. They are stable. They can be easily handled in rough water because the North Sea is not it's not like sailing in a bathtub. Let me just say that. They are marked by their many oars and their dragon prow. So in the 10th century, we see that the Vikings begin to really decrease their raids. We see that they convert to Christianity and really become settled peoples in Europe. And yet these Viking groups are going to continue to explore the North Atlantic, eventually landing in Iceland, Greenland, and in fact North America. So they are definitely the first Europeans to step into the Americas in the Hudson Bay region. They got there and were like, too cold, and they went back. So we see that some of these Vikings, some of these Anglo-Saxons, right, will settle in Normandy. So Normandy is northern France. And then, let me start over. Some of these Vikings will settle in Normandy. They will then launch from there and invade England. So they will end Anglo-Saxon rule by putting the Normans are in charge. So William the Conqueror is one of these Normans. Other groups of Normans take over Sicily, but this is a group that had originally come from Scandinavia, but then had been settled in sort of what's modern day France and Normandy, and then are just like taking over different bits of Europe. I've been to the Norman castle and cathedral on the island of Sicily. It's pretty neat, but definitely does not look Italian. So the Vikings are going to attack such a large area because Vikings are able to attack such a large area because of their ability to adapt their technology and their knowledge to overcome different geographic barriers. And the creation of the feudal system is going to be due to the ineffective central governments in Western Europe in response to Viking attacks. So as the Europeans are grappling with the slow collapse of the Roman Empire, you have to remember that it's not like they get a tweet that Rome's gone and then like all of civilization collapses. No, it takes place over centuries. So, what precedent does Charlemagne create for future European rulers? All right, so like I said, this decline of Europe takes place over centuries. It's a slow process, and it starts before Rome is even conquered by the Visigoths, right? It's the far reaches of the Roman Empire are just having less and less contact with their sort of Roman leaders. We see that over time, big cities will shrink to villages. With the collapse of Rome, you have new sort of central governments, but these governments are not investing in infrastructure. So Roman roads are breaking down over disuse and disrepair. We see that it's really a step backwards in technology and sophistication. So instead of living in, mansions, you see people are living in small hatched huts, right, with grass roofs. Instead of using gold coins, people are bartering for goods again. So these are very much self-sufficient economies, instead of having all resources ultimately funnel into Rome. Instead of having this vast network of the Roman economy in which these different communities are part of, you have these different communities living in isolation and doing just fine. So, with this isolation, you also see a decline in literacy, and other parts of German life will begin to be more dominant than Roman traditions. So, beer, Germanic languages, some of the clothing and the habits are going to be more common over Latin, Roman-based traditions. So what did your average peasant in medieval Europe eat? Lots of beer, butter, bread, and every once in a while it would be supplemented by pork or game. By that I mean like rabbit, birds. It's actually a very well-balanced diet because all of this will of course be supplemented by a lot of vegetables. They're working all day outside. They are eating a balanced diet. It's not a bad life, right? A lot of times we think of the Dark Ages and we think of people just like rolling in the mud, starving, dying of the plague, don't know how to read, it's terrible. No, it's just isolated. That's all. So what is the military system? Nope. What is the economic system we see in place here? Well, the economic system in medieval Europe will be known as manorialism. In manorialism, you have a large, self-sufficient landholding consisting of a lord's residence, the manor house, outbuildings, a peasant village, and surrounding land. So this is an economic system, not military, not political. So it's an organization between the landlords and the peasant laborers. These peasant laborers will be known as serfs. They are agricultural laborers who are legally bound to the lord's property and are obligated to perform a set of services for the lord. So they aren't quite slaves. Now, when we get to like Russia, and the fact that they're still going to have serfs in Russia by the time we get to the 1800s, those people are basically slaves. But medieval serfs are really part of a reciprocal relationship. Serfs are obligated to give their lord a portion of their produce, what they grow, what they prepare. Lords are then obligated to protect the serfs and provide for their everyday means. So when we picture sort of manorialism, don't picture something from Game of Thrones or from like Lord of the Rings, a large bustling city. No, this is more likely going to be like 100 people, right? It's going to be smaller than your total sophomore class. You're going to have like a family living in the manor, but like, oh no, something broke. We need to, rebuild this wall. The Lord is getting his hands dirty alongside the serfs, right? You all have to work together. Life's kind of hard. So this system is a result of the warfare and the chaos in a post-Rome world, right? Because you cannot rely on Rome for your economic prosperity. People just turned to their communities, right? The lords were originally just like probably the wealthiest guy in town. So this system had low levels of production, and technology was extremely limited. You possessed fields, gardens, fish ponds, mill. I mean, look at that picture on the slide. Like, that's what your basic manorial system looked like. Your protection might be a ditch or a stone wall. So, manors helped to create a system of local politics with regional aristocrats. This is going to be the most common form of organization until the Vikings arrive. The weaknesses of this system is their isolation. Because of poor communication networks, they're not teamed up, so when one group gets attacked, you don't have a lot of support. So because of their isolation, when outside invaders show up, you're really on your own. So there's no centralized government, no need for outside trade, and so you have very limited economic opportunity and innovation. So let's start talking about the political system. As these manors began to have to protect their serfs more and more from the Vikings, the warriors are going to become very wealthy because they'll be able to take all the wealth off the Vikings once they are defeated. So land owning will become inseparable from military service. So your manors will become knights, right? The lord of the manor will be a knight. So this is the emergence of European feudalism. European feudalism is a relationship among the military elite in which greater lords provided protection to lesser lords in return to military service. So Europeans will turn to feudalism for greater protection from the Vikings, but will keep manorialism as an economic system within small communities. So it's a military and political system. Rulers provide protection and aid to nobles. These nobles, everyone underneath the king, would be considered a vassal. A vassal is the sworn supporter of a king or a lord committed to rendering specific military service to that lord or king. So, going back, a noble, a duke, is a vassal of the king. A knight might be the vassal of the duke and the king. The peasant would be the vassal of the knight, duke, and king, right? So you're sort of the vassal of everyone above you on this pyramid. So it's a situation where, oh no, Normandy's being invaded by the Vikings. The king is like, Duke of Burgundy, gather all your knights and go protect the Normans. Because of this system, the Duke of Burgundy has to gather all of his knights and go help fight. In return, the king will give goods, payments, land, right? So a fief is land granted in return for a sworn oath to provide military service. And the peasants would own the serfs who worked and lived on that land. So what's the benefit of this system? Well, it provided greater protection against raids. It provided military stability. It meant you always had a standing army, and all of these manors are no longer isolated. The results will be a strong feudal monarchy developing in Europe. This is a process that takes many centuries. So, manors will be absorbed into larger kingdoms as more nobles pledge allegiance to kings. The result is regional monarchies with strong aristocracies. Because of frequent warfare, you have the castle sort of defense system develop. So why do we have so many fabulous castles in Europe? Well, because they were always attacking each other. So in all of this system, where do women fit? Well, women don't really have any say. They were really only important as heiresses or as candidates for marriage, right? As daughter of the Duke, me marrying this guy can mean a strong alliance, or I bring a lot of wealth or land into this marriage. And of course, the women had no say over marriage. Because of that, women were heavily guarded. Noble women were guarded, right? You couldn't let your daughter just marry anyone, because then, she might get this other dude might get all of your land. But women could own land. They are the ones who took care of the land, right? When the Duke of Burgundy was off fighting the war, who do you think was running the manor? It was the wife. So, yes, while they were relatively isolated, they were not just kept up in a tower embroidering all day. They were actively participating in the running of this large economic system. Oh gosh, the blacksmith needs X, Y, and Z, but the lord of the manor's gone away. What do? Well, you tell the lady of the manor, and she gets it done. Non-noble women would work out in the field and do whatever jobs needed to be done. So, what do we do to keep up from getting just a bunch of tyrants? From just getting all of these lords and kings getting more and more power? Well, the growth of feudal monarchies ultimately would diminish aristocratic power, right? The more powerful the king is, the less powerful the lords of the land are. So there will be attempts made to limit monarchical power. The first example of this is the Magna Carta. So the English king, King John, is going to be forced at sword point to recognize the supremacy of written law. So basically the king can't just ignore a law passed by Parliament. He is forced to give basic rights to noblemen. In 1265, you have the establishment of the English Parliament, which will serve as a check on royal authority. It's a collaboration between the king and the aristocrats. In France, you will have the creation of the three estates: the church, the nobles, and the commoners. And then you have certain legal rights related to your estate. And yet, despite all of this, monarchs in Europe will continue to increase in power and in influence. Large conflicts like the Hundred Years' War will lead to early ideas of nationalism, in which kings are leaders that embody countries' principles. So think like Henry V. This is a really fun video. It's not strictly necessary, but Monty Python is always funny. This one I would like you to watch. You just have to watch up to the secret letter or whatever the document is. So, what are the differences between manorialism and feudalism? And what causes European communities to develop feudalism? Why not just stay with manorialism? Okay, let's talk a little bit about the church. So, the Catholic Church will face a lot of challenges, but the main thing to know is that their structure is going to be really different than the Orthodox Church. So, the Catholic Church will ultimately become the most powerful and wealthy institution in the West. After the collapse of Western Rome, cultural unity will be provided by Christianity. This, of course, will be opportunities for abuse and corruption. The church often owned large land holdings, but the Roman Catholic Church is going to have a lot of continuities with Rome itself. So the clear hierarchy of the church mirrors the Roman government. The Pope, like the emperor, is the one who regulated doctrine. So after the precedent set by Charlemagne, papal power is greater than the political power of kings. So the papacy is the central administration of the Roman Catholic Church, and the Pope is its head. So according to Roman Catholic tradition, the first Pope, well, first of all, the Pope is just the Bishop of Rome, right? And the first Pope is going to be Saint Peter. The Catholics are judging me. Is it Peter or is it Paul? I'm pretty sure it's Peter. Yes, because he holds the keys to the kingdom. So, the Pope is the guy in charge. And he is going to have control over legal jurisdiction of all clergy and church property. So this is going to propose some challenges, right? You have regional disagreements over church regulation, right? Some Christians in Germany are like, we don't agree with this. The Italians are like, no, this is great. You see, in general, a shortage of educated and trained clergy, right? Men who actually know how to read, can read the Bible, know how to teach it well, know the rules of Christianity. You see difficulty in communications, political disorder, and in general insecurity. In certain parts of Europe, you have lingering polytheism, right? People are still worshiping their pagan gods. And in general, you have problems with nepotism, which is when you give favors to like family members and friends. So the Pope would make his nephew a cardinal, even though his nephew is 14, just because he's related. Simony, which is going to be the selling of ecclesiastic appointments. So that means, oh, you want to be a bishop? Okay, it's going to be $5 million. And finally, clergy marrying. Clerical celibacy is something that's going to emerge over time. It's not something that's in the Bible anywhere. And the Roman Catholic tradition is the only major Christian branch that practices it. Orthodox Christians and Protestants, their pastors and priests are allowed to get married and have children. So let's look at the hierarchy a little bit. At the top is the Pope. Then you have cardinals, then archbishops, bishops, priests, deacons, and laity. So if you are just an average Catholic person, you are part of the laity. You will probably come in contact most frequently with your local priest. So the priest is ordained to give out the sacraments, communion, baptism, and Catholic tradition says you must receive the sacraments to be saved. The priest can't do it all on his own, though. So you also have deacons who assist the priest, but they cannot administer the sacraments. So multiple priests answer to a bishop. multiple bishops answer to an archbishop. So let's compare this to a school district. The laity would be like you students, right? Lots of students, you're just sort of there. So the person you come in contact with most is your teacher. So like your teacher would be like the priest, right? I'm in charge of one class. Then the priests answer to the bishops, just like the teachers answer to the principal, right? But then multiple principals answer to the superintendent, just like multiple bishops answer to the archbishop. But all the superintendents in Arizona have to answer to the statewide superintendent of education, just like all the archbishops in a region have to answer to a single cardinal, right? And then ultimately, all the superintendents of education in the United States have to answer to the Department of Education on the federal level, just like all cardinals have to answer to the Pope. So, if you're Catholic, how are you saved? A little bit of theology here. Well, you have to receive the sacraments: baptism, confirmation, marriage, death rites, communion. There's a bunch. Holy orders if you become a priest. So, confession, you live a good life. You repent of your sins. And when you die, if you have lived a good life, repented of your sins and received God's grace, grace given to you through the sacrifice of Christ Jesus, you will go to heaven. But let's say you lived a terrible life, you were super sinful, you weren't even Christian and murdered a bunch of people, well, then you're going to hell. What if you lived a mediocre life? Like you went to church most Sundays, but you never really went to confession. You were never baptized. You missed communion a bunch of times. Well, then you would go to purgatory. Now, purgatory is a uniquely Catholic tradition, and the idea is in purgatory, your soul would be purified, and then eventually you could get to heaven. It's like a waiting room. So, the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire is going to exist forever. Look at that. It exists for like 1,000 years. It's really just a loose confederation of German states and principalities. So you have a bunch of like German princes, and they're all part of the Holy Roman Empire. So the Holy Roman Emperor is elected by the various princes. It was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, to quote Voltaire. It's going to really merge classical and Christian claims, and thus proclaiming itself a Christian continuation of Rome. And it will provide a little bit of stability, but the power of the Holy Roman Empire will be really limited because the Holy Roman Emperor is going to have to be subservient to the popes. So, you will see the investiture controversy, which will be a dispute between the popes and the Holy Roman Empires about who ultimately holds authority over bishops in imperial lands. Basically, popes can pick the bishops, but emperors can invest certain rights or obligations before their spiritual consecration. You don't need to know the details of it. Just know that you have a power struggle between the Holy Roman Emperors and the popes. In England, you'll see some of this tension between King Henry II, grandson of William the Conqueror, and Thomas Becket. So the investiture controversy will just institute a bunch of reforms intended to strengthen the king, and Thomas A. Becket, who is a friend of Henry II, will become a priest because his best friend Henry, the King of England, asked him to become a priest. But when he becomes a priest, he takes it really seriously, and he places the church before the crown and will ultimately become Archbishop of Canterbury. Well, the king is going to try to institute some more reforms to strengthen the king and weaken priests, Thomas A. Becket is like, no, I need to protect my priests. Henry's like, ugh, can you believe this guy? I thought he was my friend. Look at him backstab me. I just wish someone would go kill him. He's just venting. Well, some knights are like, oh, the king said to kill him. We better go kill him. So they go and murder Thomas A. Becket in Canterbury Cathedral, and it becomes a pilgrimage site. I've been there. You can see the spot where he was killed. So in general, these are just different examples of the competing power between the Catholic Church and the state. This is going to be an ongoing problem in Europe, one that doesn't exist in the Byzantine Empire or in the Islamic caliphates. So, monasticism. Monasticism is this tradition that exists in Christianity, but also in Buddhism, in other religious traditions as well. So living a monastic life is living in a religious community, set apart from secular society, and adhering to sort of the rules of that community, which often involve chastity, obedience, and poverty. So the main guy here is Saint Benedict, Benedict of Nursia, and he's going to create the Benedictine rule for monks. So he's really the founder of Western monasticism. Over time, though, these monks will have their own challenges and corruption, and we see the need for reform in the 11th century with Gregory the Seventh. So the problem was, who do the monks answer to? Do the monks answer to a local priest? Do they answer straight to the Pope? Do they answer to the king? Pope Gregory VII is going to try to free the church from interference from kings. And the result is going to be that monks end up doing kind of their own thing, right? And monks are sort of a separate column apart from that hierarchical pyramid we looked at before. So monks answer sort of straight to the Pope. But you have a bunch of new holy orders emerging. The Cistercians, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, and each one has a slightly different focus. So monastic life is one that's really focused on discipline, intense spirituality, extreme piety, and celibacy. So monks were to be examples of ordinary people living a holy life. So monasteries could be for men, right? Or like nunneries for women. And you might think, why would someone do this? Well, for women especially, it offers a alternative independent route, right? If you didn't want to just be married off to some random dude, you could become a nun and live a life learning how to read, gardening, serving, praying, right? It gives you independence that you wouldn't otherwise have. So intellectual and literacy will decline in the Middle Ages, except among monks and monasteries. It's really the only reason why Europeans remembered how to read is because of monks. Libraries will be maintained, books will be created. So please do watch this one. I know I just spouted a bunch of stuff about monks. This is a quick video to summarize all of it. You don't need to remember a ton of details about monks. Just generally, what are they? So, what is monasticism? Why are they significant to medieval history? Let's do a couple practice questions and finish this up. I know I've been talking for a long time. I apologize for that. So, it's a source-based question. Here's your source. I can only cry from my heart before Christ's altar, O Lord, spare thy people, lest the heathen say, where is the God of the Christians? Native of England, reacting to an attack by the Vikings on a monastery. So, which of the following maritime innovations allowed the Vikings to adapt to varying environments in their migrations? Of the following, which would have been a response to the various groups, such as the Vikings, assailing Europe? So for your summary, please explain the effects of agriculture on social organization in Europe between 1200 and 1450. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great day.